before the world knew the name John Glanton, before newspapers called him a demon of the frontier, before he became the man even killers stepped away from. He was only a thin, quiet boy walking through the harsh dirt roads of South Carolina. His world was not gentle. His childhood was shaped by fear, instability, and the heavy shadows of the early 1800s time, when survival was more important than dreams. John grew up in a place where problems were solved with fists, knives, or guns. Violence was not shocking. It was normal. It lived in the fields, in the taverns, in the streets. As a child, he saw men fight over land, animals, insults, anything. He watched neighbors disappear after arguments, never to return. He saw families break apart. He learned early that life was fragile, and only the strong could protect themselves. His father struggled to provide. Some days there was enough food, some days there wasn't. His mother tried to keep the family together, but the world around them was unforgiving. John often wandered alone, exploring forests, creeks, and empty roads. He became a quiet observer of life, always watching, always learning. But inside him, something dangerous was forming. At around 10 years old, John watched a violent fight between two grown men. One man insulted the other. Within seconds, knives were out. The stronger man stabbed the weaker one in the chest, right in front of John. The boy didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply stared as life slipped from the dying man's eyes. In that silent moment, something changed inside him. Most children would run. Most would be terrified. But John felt a strange calm, a cold acceptance. He didn't understand it then, but the world was already shaping him into someone different. Someone who would one day become a legend of brutality. His family moved westward when he was still young. They hoped for better land, safer ground, and a chance to start over. But the frontier was even harder. Every step toward Texas brought new dangers: bandits, sickness, hunger, and constant fear of attack. John saw wagons break, horses die, and families fall apart in the dust. Yet he kept moving forward, always quiet, always watching. On the long journey, he learned to shoot. At first, it was only for hunting, but his father noticed something unsettling. The boy had a natural talent with a gun. He never flinched, never hesitated. He aimed steady, fired steady, and never apologized for taking a life, even if it was just an animal. The frontier respected men like that. It rewarded strength and punished weakness. By the time the family reached Texas, John was no longer a boy. He was hardened, cold, and ready to survive at any cost. Texas in the 1830s was a land of constant war, battles with Mexico, raids by Apache warriors, and conflicts between settlers were normal. Many men died before reaching 20. Many carried guns even while sleeping. John felt strangely at home in this chaos. He took work where he could, helping ranchers, scouting trails, riding with small militias. He watched older men fight. He listened to the stories of gun battles, ambushes, and duels. He learned how to track footprints, how to notice danger in the distance, and how to move silently across rough ground. And then came the moment that would change him forever. One night, a small group of Mexican bandits raided a settlement near where John worked. They burned homes, stole animals, and attacked several families. John saw it with his own eyes. He watched fire rise into the sky. He heard screams echo across the dark valley. Something inside him snapped. The next morning, he joined a group of men riding out to track the bandits. He had never been in a real fight before. He didn't know how he would react, but deep inside, he felt a cold fire, a desire for revenge, for control, for power. They caught the bandits by a riverbank. A gunfight broke out instantly. Bullets sliced through trees. Horses screamed. Men fell. Dust clouded the air. And in that chaos, young John Glanton took his first life. He didn't hesitate. He didn't freeze. He raised his gun, aimed, and fired. When the bandit dropped, John didn't look away. He walked over slowly, staring at the man's lifeless body. He felt no fear, no regret, only silence. The other men noticed. They saw the calm in his eyes, the steady way he held his gun, the strange comfort he found in violence. From that day on, John Glanton was no longer the quiet boy from South Carolina. He had crossed a line most men feared to approach. The frontier accepted him now. It welcomed him. It shaped him. This was the beginning of a transformation that would eventually make his name feared across Mexico, Texas, Arizona, and beyond. For John, killing had become easy. Survival had become natural. And destiny had already chosen a dark path for him. But this was only the beginning. Texas in the early 1830s was a land caught between hope and danger. People came searching for new lives, new land, and new beginnings. But they found themselves trapped in the middle of a silent, endless war between settlers, Mexican forces, and the powerful Apache tribes. Every sunrise promised opportunity, and every sunset reminded them that death could come at any moment. For young John Glanton, this world wasn't terrifying. It felt strangely right. After his first kill during the bandit raid, something inside him awakened. He felt confident for the first time, strong, certain. He had crossed into the world of fighting, and the frontier seemed to open its arms to him. Older men now looked at him with respect, some even with fear. John learned quickly that in Texas, every man carried a weapon because every man expected a fight. He worked with ranchers, scouts, and militia groups, always moving from one job to the next. He was quiet, serious, and always alert. People noticed his steady hands, his sharp eyes, and the cold calm that never seemed to leave him, not even during danger. It wasn't long before he began riding with men who were more than farmers or settlers. These were fighters. Men who lived for the thrill of battle and the rush of violence, and Texas gave them plenty of opportunities. At 17, John joined a small group of frontier soldiers who patrolled the land for raiders. These men were often the first line of defense against surprise attacks. They tracked footprints, watched the horizon, and slept with rifles under their blankets. Life with them was hard. Food was scarce. Sleep was short. Every hour was filled with tension. But John fit right in. He adapted to the harsh life faster than anyone expected. He learned how to read broken branches, how to judge distance by sound, how to tell if someone was tracking him, even when he couldn't see them. He learned to move like a hunter, like a predator. The first real test of these skills came during a raid along the Nueces River. A small settlement had been attacked, and the patrol group tracked the raiders into the heavy brush. When they found them, the fight exploded instantly. Guns cracked through the trees, horses screamed and bucked, dust and smoke filled the air. Men shouted commands no one could hear. It was chaos, the kind of chaos that made most young fighters freeze in fear. But not John Da. He moved through the smoke with purpose, keeping low, firing only when he saw a clear target. He didn't waste bullets. He didn't panic. His focus was sharp, controlled, almost frightening. When the fight ended, several men turned to look at him. One older soldier, a man with deep scars across his cheek, whispered, "That boy's got ice in his blood." John didn't hear the comment. He was too busy reloading, his hand steady despite the adrenaline pumping through him. Something about the battle made him feel alive, clear, almost peaceful. Word of his skills spread quickly. By 19, he was riding with groups connected to the Texas Rangers. Not a formal member yet, but close enough to learn their tactics. The Rangers were tough, fearless, and known for brutal fights against raiders on both sides of the border. They welcomed anyone who could keep up, and John more than proved himself. In one fight, Surrounded by raiders in a canyon, he managed to break through the enemy line alone, firing with deadly precision. Other men later recalled that he didn't seem afraid of dying. He rode like someone who believed death couldn't touch him. That belief made him dangerous. During these years, John's hatred for Mexico and certain Apache groups deepened. He saw burning settlements. He found the bodies of settlers killed in raids. He saw friends fall in ambushes. Every loss hardened him. Every tragedy carved him deeper into the man he would become. But the truth was more complicated. He didn't fight only out of anger. He fought because war made sense to him. In the chaos of battle, something inside him felt balanced, controlled. Violence didn't confuse him, it clarified him. Texas was shaping John Glanton into something rare. A man who didn't fear danger, didn't hesitate in violence, and didn't question the darkest decisions. The people around him began to trust him in fights, but they never truly felt close to him. John didn't share stories. He didn't laugh around the campfire. He didn't drink heavily or brag about kills like others did. He simply existed, silent, sharp, and always ready. Yet inside him, something else was growing. Something dangerous. He was beginning to enjoy the power that came with fear. He noticed how men stepped aside when he walked past. He saw how others watched him during fights, hoping he would lead. Slowly, without even realizing it, John was stepping onto the path that would eventually make him one of the most feared men in the American frontier. But Texas wasn't finished with him yet. A new conflict was coming, a war that would test every skill he had learned and push him deeper into the darkness that waited inside him. And this time, the world wasn't shaping John Glanton. This time, John Glanton would shape the world around him. By the time John Glanton entered his early 20s, he was no longer just another young man trying to survive the frontier. He had become something different. Something sharper, harder, colder. The world around him was a battlefield, and he had learned to move through it with the quiet confidence of a man who had already faced death and refused to bow. Every part of his life was now shaped by conflict. He spent years riding with frontier soldiers, scouts, and sometimes Texas Rangers, not officially enlisted, but always nearby, always useful, always dangerous. The Rangers valued skills more than paperwork, and John had skills that couldn't be taught. He could track footsteps across dry rock, sense danger before it appeared, shoot with calm precision, and stay focused in the middle of pure chaos. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a leader yet, but he was becoming the kind of man others followed in silence. The frontier kept testing him. Texas was caught in constant tension with Mexico, and every month brought a new skirmish, a new raid, a new reason to fight. Glanton rode on patrols that lasted days without rest. He crossed rivers with bullets flying around him. He tracked raiders through thick brush and rocky canyons. He fought in ambushes where the only light came from moonlight reflecting off gun barrels, and in every battle, he learned something new about himself. One day, during a raid near the Rio Grande, Glanton and a group of men chased a small band of Mexican fighters into the open desert. The sun burned overhead, making the air shimmer. The ground was dry, cracked, and silent. After hours of pursuit, they finally caught up. A gunfight erupted. Men shouted. Horses kicked up dust. Bullets tore through the air. One of Glanton's companions was shot and fell from his saddle. Another man panicked and fled, but Glanton stayed firm. He crouched behind a fallen tree, breathing slow, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When he fired, he didn't miss. Every shot was deliberate. Calm, deadly dot. When the fight ended, only Glanton stood untouched. A ranger captain approached him afterward, staring with an expression somewhere between respect and fear. "You don't shake, boy," the captain said quietly. Glanton didn't answer. He never knew what to say, to praise or fear. Made for this, aren't you? The captain added. John just looked at him with cold, steady eyes. He didn't enjoy killing, but he didn't fear it either, and that made him dangerous. The more he fought, the more others recognized him. He became known as a man who didn't back down, didn't panic, didn't blink. Men followed his lead without him ever asking him. Some admired him, some feared him, most couldn't understand him, and Glanton didn't explain himself. He kept to the edges of the campfires, ate his meals alone, and rarely spoke unless necessary. There was a wall inside him, thick, heavy, unbreakable. Something deep in his past, perhaps that violent childhood, kept him distant from everyone else. The truth was simple. John Glanton trusted the world only when he had a weapon in his hand. His transformation accelerated during the Mexican-American War. He volunteered as a scout and fighter, using his knowledge of the land to guide soldiers through dangerous territory. Battles became larger, bloodier, more organized than the smallest skirmishes he had survived before. Cannons thundered, lines of soldiers charged, smoke covered the sky. But even here, in the middle of official war, Glanton acted the same way he always had: quiet, fearless, efficient. Officers respected him. Some relied on him more than they admitted, but even among hundreds of men, John remained an outsider. During a mission near Monterey, his group was ambushed. The attack was sudden and brutal. Men fell instantly, some calling out for help, others too wounded to speak. The survivors scrambled for cover, shouting confused orders, but Glanton didn't retreat. He moved forward, right into the storm of gunfire. He used rocks and fallen trees as cover, firing with deadly accuracy. His movements were smooth, instinctive, almost animal-like. Even when blood from another soldier splashed across his clothes, he didn't break focus. By the end of the fight, Glanton had saved the lives of several men, but he didn't stay to celebrate. He simply picked up his rifle, wiped the dust from his hands, and walked away from the battlefield as if nothing had happened. The men who watched him whispered, "That one ain't normal. He was born for war," but war didn't just sharpen Glanton's skills. It darkened him. He saw villages burned. He saw children lost in the ruins of destroyed homes. He saw men die slowly, begging for water. All of these images sank into his mind and changed him. Instead of softening him, they hardened him. Violence stopped feeling like a terrible act and started feeling like a necessary language, a language he understood better than anyone else. The turning point came when someone close to him, one of the few people he had allowed into his life, was killed during a border raid. The loss cut deep, deeper than anything he had felt before. It didn't break him. It turned him colder. His grief didn't come out as tears. It came out as anger, a quiet, silent, burning anger that would shape the next stage of his life. This was the moment he stopped being a fighter and started becoming something far more dangerous. In the distance, a rumor was spreading. Mexico was offering money for Apache scalps, and Glanton was about to hear that offer. What he chose next would change history. War had shaped John Glanton into a weapon, sharp, cold, and always ready. But weapons don't last forever on battlefields run by governments. When the Mexican-American War cooled down, the world around him shifted. Men who had once been soldiers suddenly became wanderers. Camps broke apart, units disbanded, soldiers returned home to farms, families, and quiet lives. But John Glanton had no home to return to, no family waiting, no peaceful land calling his name. He only had one skill: fighting, and the frontier still demanded men like him for a while. He drifted across Texas, working as a scout here, a guard there, but none of it felt right. He was built for conflict, not routine. He found himself growing restless, angry, trapped inside a world that no longer needed him, until one day In a crowded cantina near the Rio Grande, he overheard something that changed everything. Mexico was offering bounties for Apache scalps. Raids had been increasing. Settlements were burning. Ranchers were dying. The Mexican government was desperate. They offered cash for every Apache warrior killed, proof delivered in the form of a scalp. To most men, it sounded brutal. To some, it sounded insane. To John Glanton, it sounded like opportunity. He didn't hesitate. He gathered a few fighters. He trusted men hardened by years of war. Some were former rangers, some deserters, some fugitives from the law. They were all different, but they shared one thing. They were tired of taking orders and ready to carve their own path. No matter how dark it was. The group started small. A few Americans, a few Mexicans, a few desperate drifters, and men with nothing left to lose. Glanton became their natural leader, not because he asked, but because everyone feared what he could do. His cold silence, steady aim, and ruthless instinct made him the anchor of the group. They entered Mexico as hired hunters. But the frontier had other plans. Their first mission was a long pursuit across rocky valleys and dusty plains. The Apache warriors they chased were skilled, fast, and fearless. They knew the land better than the wind. Days passed with no sign of them. Nights felt like traps waiting to snap. Every sound in the darkness made the men tighten their grips on their guns. But Glanton didn't panic. He moved with calm focus, reading the land like a map only he could understand. When others suggested turning back, John insisted they push forward, and finally, they found their target. The fight was swift, violent, and merciless. The hunters quickly became hunted as the Apache warriors ambushed them from the ridges. Arrows flew, bullets cracked. Dust rose like ghosts from the ground. One of Glanton's men fell immediately. Another took an arrow through the leg. But Glanton, he moved like he'd been preparing for this moment his whole life. He fired with perfect precision, never wasting a shot, never letting fear cloud his mind. When the ambush broke and the Apaches retreated, Glanton followed them without hesitation. By the end of the fight, the hunters stood victorious, and that's when the men faced the brutal truth of their new job. They had to claim scalps. Even the hardest of the group hesitated. The weight of what they were doing suddenly felt real. It wasn't war, it wasn't defense. It was business, cold, bloody business. But Glanton stepped forward and did what needed to be done. The others watched. Some looked away, some copied him with shaking hands. But in the end, they all understood one thing. This was the world they had chosen. And Glanton was the man who would lead them through it. Their first payment changed everything. The government paid well, more than any soldier made, more than any ranch job could offer, enough to make desperate men believe that violence could be a path to wealth. More men joined the group, more weapons were bought, more raids were planned, and very quickly, something dark began forming, not just a hunting party. A gang. The Glanton gang. At first, they hunted only Apache warriors. But the frontier twisted quickly. Scalps became money, money became greed, and greed turned the men restless, hungry, and dangerous. They realized no one checked the origins of a scalp. No one asked questions. No one cared. A scalp was a scalp. A dollar was a dollar. The line that separated war from murder began to fade. The men who followed John Glanton were changing, and Glanton himself was changing faster than all of them. Violence, greed, and lawlessness were blending into something powerful, something deadly. They were becoming a force the frontier had never seen before, and the world ahead of them wasn't ready. Because now, John Glanton wasn't just a fighter, he was the leader of a growing band of killers, and very soon, they would stop following rules altogether. The Glanton gang rode into Mexico as hired hunters, but what they became afterward was something far more dangerous. Their first successful mission brought them gold, praise, and confidence. Too much confidence? The men tasted easy money, and money had a way of twisting minds in the harsh deserts of the frontier. At first, they tried to follow the government's rules. They hunted Apache warriors, tracked raiders, and delivered scalps for payment. But the frontier didn't care about rules, and neither did the men who followed John Glanton. Every scalp was worth silver. Every kill was profit. And soon the gang discovered a truth that would turn them into monsters. No one checked who the scalps belonged to. It didn't matter if the person was a warrior, a villager, a traveler, or even a child. The officials simply counted, paid, and sent the men away. For some hunters, this truth felt disturbing. For others, it felt tempting. For the Glanton gang, it felt like a doorway opening into darkness. Their first step over the line happened during a long, exhausting chase. The Apache trail was cold, and the men had been riding for days without results. Food was low, tempers were high. The desert sun felt like a hammer hitting the back of their necks. Then they spotted a small group of peaceful Mexican farmers traveling with their families. They were not raiders. They were not warriors. They were simply people trying to survive. But the men noticed the farmers were carrying supplies, food, blankets, tools, things the gang desperately needed. Some of the new members whispered to each other. Hunger and greed were stronger than morality. Glanton watched silently. He didn't tell them to attack. He didn't tell them to stop. He just waited, and in that silence, the worst voices in the group took control. Within minutes, guns were drawn. Shouts echoed across the dust. When it was over, innocent people lay still in the sand. The men stood around breathing heavily, some ashamed, some thrilled, all waiting for Glanton to react. But he didn't say a word. He simply looked down at the bodies, then at the scalps, and made his decision. They would claim them. He gave no speech, no order, no justification. His silence was enough. The message was clear. If a scalp brought money, it was worth taking. And from that moment on, the Glanton gang stopped pretending they were hunters. They became predators. The news of their brutality spread quickly across Sonora and Chihuahua. Villagers whispered stories of a pale-eyed American leading a pack of killers who rode with no mercy and no fear. The gang raided ranches, small towns, and camps. They killed without hesitation, sometimes for supplies, sometimes for revenge, sometimes for nothing at all. Every scalp went into a sack. Every sack became silver. Every piece of silver brought more blood. Glanton himself changed too. He spoke even less now, but his silence was heavier. Men followed him because he represented something they understood: the raw power of violence. He didn't boast about kills. He didn't laugh during raids. He remained calm, steady, focused. A man who believed himself untouchable, and in a land ruled by chaos. That belief made him almost unstoppable. But greed never comes without consequences. The Mexican officials who once hired the gang soon realized something was wrong. The scalps being delivered didn't look like Apache warriors. They looked like villagers, merchants, farmers, children. Fear grew inside the towns. People began locking their doors, building walls, and praying for the gang to disappear. The government tried to stop them. Bounties were placed on their heads. Soldiers were sent to track them, but every attempt failed. Glanton's men were fast, skilled, and ruthless. They slipped through traps, ambushed pursuers, and left trails of destruction behind them. Soon the Mexican government declared the entire gang outlaws. They were no longer hunters. They were wanted men. The gang fled north, back across the desert, hoping to escape the growing army chasing them. The land was harsh, burning days, freezing nights. Men became sick, horses collapsed, supplies ran low. But fear kept them moving. Every village they passed shut their doors. Every campfire died when they rode near it. Mothers pulled their children inside. Men hid behind walls. The Glanton gang had become a rumor, a nightmare, a shadow that people whispered about but never dared to confront. And worst of all, the gang began turning on itself. Arguments broke out. Some men wanted to return home. Some wanted to continue killing. Others feared Glanton himself, whispering that he cared more about blood than money. Trust was fading. Paranoia was growing. Violence wasn't just something they did, it was something shaping who they were. But Glanton didn't waver. He led them through deserts and mountains with the same cold confidence he'd learned in war. His eyes never softened. His decisions never changed. He believed they were destined to carve their own place in the world, even if it was through fear. Finally, after weeks of running, the gang crossed into the territory that would become Arizona. They thought they were escaping danger. They had no idea that the most deadly chapter of their story was just beginning, a chapter that would end in blood, betrayal, and a river crossing that would change their fate forever. The Glanton gang rode into the Arizona borderlands like ghosts drifting out of a nightmare. They were fugitives now hunted by Mexican soldiers, unwanted by American settlers, feared by every tribe that lived between the deserts and the mountains. What had started as a scalp-hunting group was now a roaming army of broken men, driven by money, blood, and the cold leadership of John Glanton. Arizona was empty, wild, and lawless. It was a land of deep canyons, red earth, and endless silence. To most, it felt like the edge of the world. To Glanton and his men, it felt like the perfect place to disappear and to unleash the violence inside them. But something inside the gang had changed. They no longer needed orders. They no longer needed reasons. Chaos had become their only companion, and every man carried his own darkness, like a shadow that never left his side. At night, they camped in dry riverbeds, whispering about enemies behind every hill. Some men woke up screaming, dreaming of the people they had killed. Others drank until sunrise, trying to wash away the guilt they would never admit aloud. Arguments began to break out. Voices grew sharp, fingers hovered too close to triggers. The gang didn't just fear the world anymore. They feared each other. Glanton could feel the shift. His men were restless, unpredictable, burning out like dying embers. But he did not soften. He gave no comfort, no mercy, no speeches. He simply watched with cold eyes, waiting for weakness to show to him. Only two types of men survived in the frontier, those who led and those who obeyed. And he had no intention of being anything but the first. As they pushed deeper into the borderlands, the gang continued to raid camps and small settlements. They attacked without warning, without care, without mercy. They took supplies, horses, weapons, anything they needed to survive. Every raid left behind ashes, silence, and fear. Some villages simply vanished when news of Glanton's men spread. People abandoned their homes and ran into the wilderness rather than face the horrors that followed the gang's dust trail. Glanton noticed all of it, and yet he felt nothing. To him, this was survival. The desert had no rules, so neither would he, but the cracks inside the gang were growing wider. One evening, during a cold desert night, some of the men warned Glanton directly. "We can't keep running forever," one muttered, warming his hands over the fire. Another added, "We need a place, somewhere we can stay, make money, rest." For a moment, the fire cracked loudly in the silence. Glanton didn't look up. He sharpened his knife slowly, the blade catching the fire GHT. Then he said in a calm, steady voice, "We stay alive by moving. We rest when we're dead." No one replied. No one dared. His words were cold, final, and heavy. But inside the men, anger simmered. Some wanted out. Some wanted leadership, some wanted revenge for the lives they left behind. The gang was becoming unstable like dynamite waiting for a spark. And that spark came in the form of a river. As they approached the Colorado River, the gang stumbled upon a bustling crossing, one of the few places where gold seekers and travelers could pass. Safely on their way to California, hundreds of people moved through the area each week, desperate for a better life. Ferries carried wagons and horses across the fast, dangerous water that the moment the gang saw it, they understood its value. Money, supplies, power, more than they had ever dreamed of. But more importantly, a place to stop running. The existing ferry operators tried to keep things peaceful, but peace wasn't something the Glanton gang respected. Within days, Glanton and his men took control of the crossing through intimidation, threats, and violence. Most travelers were too afraid to resist. Others who tried soon disappeared. It wasn't long before the gang ran the entire river. They charged outrageous fees. They robbed travelers. They beat anyone who complained. They killed those who refused to pay. And under Glanton's cold leadership, the ferry crossing became something terrible, a trap. The men now had money, power, and control. But with stability came something Glanton hadn't expected. The darkness inside his own gang grew stronger. Some men became reckless. Others drank constantly. Some turned violent toward the very people living near the river. Discipline was slipping. Loyalty was fading. Glanton's iron grip was no longer enough. For the first time, he wasn't just fighting the world. He was fighting the monster he had created. Meanwhile, the local Quechan Yuma tribe watched everything. They had tolerated the ferries before, but the Glanton gang was different. The tribe saw their land stolen, their people mistreated, their visitors abused. Their river turned into a place of extortion and violence. Anger grew in the hearts of the Quechua warriors, and quietly, slowly, they began preparing, because the Glanton gang believed they had finally found their safe haven. But they had unknowingly stepped into the center of the storm. The Colorado River moved like a dark, twisting serpent through the Arizona desert for travelers heading to California during the gold rush. It was the one barrier they had to cross, a line between survival and death. The Yuma Crossing was supposed to be a place of help, a place where weary families, miners, and wanderers could pay a small fee and continue their journey west. But when John Glanton and his men arrived, everything changed. They turned the crossing into a kingdom of fear. At first, the gang acted like simple ferry operators. They helped people load wagons, guided horses onto rafts, and pulled everything across the quick-moving river. But that illusion didn't last long. Glanton soon realized there was far more money to be made through threats than honest work. So he changed the rules. Travelers were charged outrageous prices, far more than anyone could afford. If someone refused, they were beaten. If someone argued, they were robbed. If someone fought back, they disappeared into the river and were never seen again. Some travelers believed they could cross without paying. They built small rafts or tried to swim. Glanton's men hunted them down. They sank boats with gunfire. They dragged swimmers back to shore, sometimes punishing them brutally, sometimes killing them outright. The message was clear: cross the river, by Glanton's rules, or don't cross at all. The gang forced out other ferry operators. Some fled in fear. Others fought and were killed. Within weeks, Glanton had total control over the crossing. Even American officials traveling west were too afraid to challenge him. Settlers whispered his name like a curse. Families prayed they would survive the journey. Every day, new travelers arrived with tired eyes, hopeful hearts, and gold fever rushing through their veins. And every day, they met Glanton's men, a group of ragged, dangerous riders with knives at their belts and rifles. Always ready, the crossing became a funnel of violence. People handed over their savings. Some tried, negotiating only to be beaten bloody. Some hid money in their clothes, but Glanton's men found it. Others tried running and never made it far. The riverbank was filled with the cries of frightened families, the shouts of angry miners, and the cold laughter of killers who believed they were untouchable. The Quechan Yuma tribe watched all of this with growing anger. For generations, the river had been theirs, a sacred place, a source of life. They respected travelers and allowed ferries to operate peacefully. But the Glanton gang brought violence to their land. They insulted tribe members. They stole from their camps. Some gang members even attacked native women, a crime that filled the tribe with deep rage. The Quechan leaders met in silence near the river one night. The elders spoke. The young warriors listened. Stories of the gang's cruelty echoed through the camp. One elder said, "This land has a heart, and its heart is crying for justice." Another added, "If we do nothing, this river will become a grave for all people." They agreed on one thing. The Glanton gang had to be removed permanently. But Glanton didn't see the storm building. He believed he was invincible. He stood on the riverbank each morning, watching travelers line up like desperate cattle. Him, the crossing felt like a throne, a place where he finally had power that no government or army could take away. He controlled the flow of people, the flow of money, and the flow of fear. His men grew bolder. They walked through the Quechan camp without respect. They stole tools, horses, and food. They insulted the tribe members openly. They acted like they owned the land, and every time the tribe approached Glanton to warn him, he brushed them aside. "This crossing is mine," he would say. "If you don't like it, try stopping me." The arrogance in his voice burned like fire. Tensions grew thicker every day. Travelers whispered among themselves, "Someone needs to stop them." Gold seekers from the east said, "This can't continue." Even members of the gang felt uneasy, sensing danger in the air. But Glanton didn't care. He was blinded by power, blinded by money, blinded by the belief that fear would always protect him. He didn't understand that fear only lasts until the people being oppressed have nothing left to lose. The Quechua warriors sharpened their knives. They positioned lookouts along the river. They studied the gang's routines, who stood guard at night, who slept early, who wandered drunk around the camp. They were waiting for the right moment, a moment when the gang was vulnerable, a moment when revenge could strike like lightning. And that moment was coming soon, as the sun set behind the jagged desert mountains. The river glowed red, as if warning of the blood soon to be spilled. Glanton's men laughed, drank, and stumbled through the camp, unaware that shadows in the distance were watching them with silent, burning hatred. The crossing had become a place of terror. But the men who created that terror were about to face something far greater. For the first time, Glanton was not the hunter, he was the prey. The sun rose and set over the Yuma Crossing, but each day felt darker than the last. Something in the air had changed. Travelers sensed it. The Quechan tribe felt it. Even some members of the Glanton gang felt it, though none dared speak the truth aloud. John Glanton had built a kingdom on fear, but fear is a weak foundation. It shakes, it cracks, and eventually it collapses. Rumors spread quietly among the travelers. This can't last forever. Someone will stop them. The tribe won't allow this cruelty much longer. But Glanton ignored all warnings. He believed he was unstoppable. He believed no one could challenge him. He believed violence gave him the right to rule. He didn't see that his empire was already falling apart. The first cracks appeared inside his own camp. For weeks, the gang had been restless, exhausted, nervous. Men argued over food, supplies, money. Some were terrified of the Quechan warriors watching them from the distance. Others complained that Glanton's greed was putting them all in danger. One night, Two of his men fought viciously over a stolen bag of gold dust taken from a dead traveler. The fight ended with one man bleeding out on the sand, while the other stood trembling with a knife in his hand. Glanton didn't blink. He didn't comfort the wounded man. He didn't punish the killer. He simply said, "Get back to work." His coldness frightened even the killers who followed him. The gang had become a snake, slowly turning on itself. The Quechan tribe felt the shift too. Their scouts observed the camp from a distance, hidden among rocks and bushes. They saw the chaos. They saw the infighting. They saw Glanton's men getting sloppy, drinking more, guarding less, sleeping deeper. The tribe's leaders gathered at night beneath the moonlight. "It is time," one elder said. "They have taken our land. They have killed our people. They have shamed our river." Another warrior added, "If we do not act now, they will destroy us all." The decision was made. A full ambush. Swift, silent, deadly. A strike that would wipe the Glanton gang from the earth. The tribe began watching even closer. Every hour, every movement, every weakness. Back at the river, Glanton continued to act like a man blind to reality. His men were tense. They whispered about shadows moving in the night. They pointed out footprints near the camp. They warned Glanton that the tribe might attack, but he dismissed every warning. "They wouldn't dare," he said, polishing his rifle. "This crossing belongs to me." Those words sealed his fate. Arrogance had become his greatest enemy. One evening, a group of travelers arrived late, hoping to cross before dark. They were tired, desperate, and low on money. Glanton demanded an outrageous fee. When the travelers couldn't pay, he ordered his men to seize their supplies. The Quechan tribe watched this unfold from the shadows. They saw the travelers beaten. They heard a woman scream. They saw two children dragged away crying. The tribe felt fury burning inside them. This was no longer about protecting territory. This was about protecting humanity. What happened that night would push the tribe over the edge. Near midnight, a Quechan elder approached the crossing under a flag of truce. He carried no weapon. He walked slowly, showing peace. His voice was calm as he spoke to Glanton. "You have taken enough. Return the travelers' belongings," the elder said. "This land is sacred. You must leave in peace." Glanton stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. He ordered his men to seize the elder. They beat him. They mocked him. They humiliated him in front of his own people, hiding in the darkness. The tribe watched in horror. Hatred turned into fire. Every warrior there made the same silent promise. John Glanton would not see another sunrise. The next day, tension wrapped the river like a heavy fog. Glanton's men moved nervously. They noticed fewer tribe members in sight. The camp was strangely quiet. Even the birds seemed to avoid the crossing. One gang member, shaking, approached Glanton privately. "We need to leave," he whispered. "Something's coming. I can feel it." Glanton brushed the warning aside. "No tribe is strong enough to fight me," he said coldly. "Let them try." But deep inside, even he felt a strange unease. That night, the moon hung low over the dark desert. The river whispered softly, carrying secrets in its current. The campfires glowed orange, lighting up the faces of tired, restless killers. The gang slept heavier than usual. They were exhausted, drunk, and careless. Their guards wandered. Their rifles sat unloaded beside blankets. They didn't hear the whispers in the wind. They didn't see shapes moving through the brush. They didn't sense the danger closing in around them. But the Quechua warriors did. They moved through the darkness like shadows with knives, silent, focused, ready. The ambush was about to begin. And John Glanton, the man who believed fear would protect him, was sleeping. The night before the attack was strangely quiet. The Colorado River moved like a dark ribbon through the desert, carrying the soft sound of water under the moonlight. The Glanton gang slept heavily in their scattered tents and blankets. Empty bottles lay on the dirt. Rifles rested carelessly beside sleeping bodies. The men had grown lazy, blind to danger, convinced they were feared too deeply to ever be challenged. They didn't know that. Just beyond the glow of their campfires, dozens of Quechan warriors were watching them in silence. The tribe moved like shadows, faces painted, knives sharpened, bows strung tight. Their bodies blended into the darkness. Their feet made no sound. They had waited weeks for this moment. Every insult, every attack, every crime, every cruelty they had witnessed had led to this night. Justice was coming, and it would not whisper. It would roar, just before dawn. When the desert was at its coldest and the air was perfectly still, the Quechan elder raised his hand. It was the same elder Glanton had beaten and humiliated. His face was calm now, his eyes filled with quiet. Fire. He lowered his hand. The warriors moved, fast, silent, deadly. They struck the guards, first slipping knives across throats before the men could even gasp. The camp stayed quiet for a few precious seconds, but then one guard cried out as he fell. The silence shattered. The attack exploded. Arrows flew through the camp, hitting men as they rose from their blankets in confusion. Warriors stormed in, with clubs, knives, and spears, striking with precision, fueled by weeks of suppressed rage. Glanton's men stumbled, shouting, grabbing for rifles that weren't loaded. Panic swept through them like a fire. Some tried to run, some tried to fight, some froze in terror. But the Quechan warriors were everywhere. John Glanton woke to a scream. He sat up fast, eyes wide, reaching for his gun. Another arrow whizzed past him, striking a man just a few feet away. Fires were being kicked apart. Horses were shrieking in fear. The air was filled with dust, smoke, and chaos. Glanton rushed to his feet, loading his rifle with shaking hands. This was no simple raid. This was war. He fired into the shadows, shouting orders that no one could hear over the screams. His men were overwhelmed, attacked from every side. The gang that once terrorized an entire region was now being torn apart like dry grass in a windstorm. One of his closest fighters fell beside him, stabbed in the chest. Glanton didn't even look down. He fired again, rage filling his body. This territory, this river, this crossing. He believed it all belonged to him. He would not let it be taken. He refused to surrender. But the river had different plans. 2 warriors charged at him. Glanton shot one in the stomach, then swung his rifle, like a club, to knock the second away. Blood sprayed across his hands. He growled like an animal, swinging the rifle again and again. He fought with the same cold fury that had defined his whole life. But for every warrior he struck down, 2 more appeared. Arrows tore through his clothes. A blade sliced across his arm. A spearhead grazed his ribs. Glanton staggered but didn't fall. His eyes were wild, desperate, burning. The Quechan warriors were shocked by his strength. This man fought like a cornered wolf. But even wolves fought when the pack surrounds them. As the sun began to rise, light crept across the battlefield, revealing the destruction. Bodies lay scattered, blood stained the sand red. Smoke drifted upward, like spirits leaving the earth. Glanton stumbled toward the riverbank, breathing hard, barely standing. He knew the fight was lost. His gang, his entire empire, was collapsing around him. The men who once followed him in fear were now silent on the ground. He tried to reload his rifle, but his hands were shaking too fiercely. The weapon slipped from his fingers and landed in the dirt. For the first time in years, John Glanton felt fear. A Quechan warrior stepped forward, tall, calm, steady. He held no hatred in his eyes, only justice. Glanton tried to stand straighter. He tried to speak. He tried to show strength, but the warrior didn't need his words. The strike was fast. A club cracked across Glanton's skull, dropping him to his knees. Another strike followed, and another. The sound echoed across the riverbank, heavy, final, undeniable. Some stories say he was scalped. Others say he was beheaded. Some claim his body was thrown into the river. But one truth is shared across every version. John Glanton died the same way. He lived in violence, surrounded by chaos, refusing to surrender even in his final breath. The Quechan warriors stood over his fallen body as the sun climbed higher. The river flowed peacefully beside them, washing away the sounds of battle. The land that Glanton had terrorized was finally quiet. His reign was over. His gang was destroyed. The nightmare had ended. Yet the legend of John Glanton, that was only beginning when the sun rose fully over the Colorado River. The dust began to settle, and the silence that followed was unlike anything the Yuma Crossing had ever heard. The screams were gone. The gunfire was gone. The terror that had ruled the river for months had vanished. All that remained were broken tents, scattered weapons, bodies lying still in the sand, and the fading smoke of a battle that had ended. The Glanton gang forever. The Quechan warriors stood quietly near the water, breathing heavily but proudly. The fight had been brutal, the cost had been high, but justice had been served. Their land, their families, their river, all were free again. Yet, even in victory, they felt no joy, only peace, only closure that the nightmare was over. As the day passed, travelers cautiously approached the river. Some had hidden in fear during the night, listening to distant fighting and praying the violence wouldn't reach them. Others had camped far away, aware that the tribe had planned something but unsure of the outcome. When they finally reached the crossing, they found the truth written clearly in the sand. The Glanton gang was gone. Their rule had ended. Their empire had fallen apart in a single morning. Some travelers cried in relief. Others whispered prayers of thanks. Some stared in shock at the Badies, remembering the cruelty they had suffered under Glanton's command. The tribe allowed the families of victims to gather what they could, to bury loved ones, to take back belongings stolen by the gang. For the first time in many months, the Yuma Crossing felt human again. News of Glanton's death traveled quickly. Across the desert, writers carried the story to California, to Texas, to New Mexico, and into Mexico. Each retelling became more dramatic, more terrifying, more unbelievable. Some said the tribe attacked with hundreds of warriors. Others claimed Glanton fought off a dozen men before falling. Some insisted he cursed the river with his dying breath. Others swore the water turned red for hours after his death. The stories changed, but one thing remained the same. John Glanton had become a legend. Not the kind told around warm campfires with pride, but the kind whispered at night to remind people what happens when a man gives his soul to violence. In the weeks that followed, the survivors of the gang scattered across the frontier. A few reached California. Others disappeared into Mexico. Some tried to start new lives. Some became drifters. Some couldn't outrun the memories of what they had done, and some were hunted down for their crimes. The world they had helped create now swallowed them whole. None of them ever found the power or freedom they once held beside Glanton. Without him, the gang was nothing more than pieces of a broken nightmare drifting across the desert wind. Historians later tried to understand who John Glanton really was. Some claimed he was shaped by violence from childhood. Others argued he was a product of endless war. Some saw him as a victim of circumstance, a man forged by the harsh world around him. Others believed he was simply a cruel soul who found comfort in chaos. But no matter how they studied him, one truth always rose above the rest. John Glanton represented the darkest side of the American frontier. He was proof that the West was not only built by heroes, explorers, and pioneers, but also by killers, mercenaries, and men who carried death with them like a shadow. His story became one of the most disturbing chapters in frontier history. Books were written about him, rumors spread, His name became tied to the violence of the scalp-hunting era, to lawlessness, and to the brutal truths most people preferred to forget. Even in fiction, his shadow lived on. Writers created characters inspired by his cruelty, his leadership, and his terrifying calm in the face of death. In stories and novels, he became larger than life, a symbol of what a man can become when he lets darkness guide every step. But in the end, his legacy carries a deeper message. John Glanton was not born a monster. He became one, slowly shaped by the violence that surrounded him, shaped by war, shaped by hunger, shaped by greed, shaped by the choices he made when no one was there to guide him. The frontier did not forgive. It did not heal. It did not teach compassion. It took men like Glanton and sharpened them. His life is a warning from the past. Power without conscience destroys everything. Violence without limits consumes the soul. And a man who believes he cannot be stopped eventually meets someone who will stop him. The Colorado River carried his story far beyond the desert. It washed away his footprints, but it could never wash away the legend. John Glanton died the way he lived, fiercely, violently, unbroken. But long after his final breath, the world continued to whisper his name, a ghostwriter of history, a shadow of the frontier, a reminder of the darkness men can become. And though his reign ended on the riverbank that morning, his story lives forever.